Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Galucki. Welcome to the 595th Imagine Greater Buffalo program and our 200th, over 200th program, 216th to be exact, YouTube program, all hosted by our wonderful downtown Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thanks for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, or C-SAAHN, as I like to pronounce the acronym, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Now, before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation as time allows. We are recording this program so you can watch it again later on the Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channel. And please, we hope you share the link with others. Now, our featured speaker today. Joining us is Dr. Anna Wager. Anna Wager, and she's Curator of Exhibitions at the University at Buffalo Art Galleries. She'll be presenting her talk, Art and Remembrance, 86 Reasons for Asylum Admission, which discusses Kimberly Chapman's solo exhibit currently on view at the UB Anderson Gallery. So, Dr. Wager, please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to be involved with this project by being at the gallery, and also obviously about the exhibition itself. So, Anna, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Dennis. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops. Right. So thank you for having me. I have been at UB Art Galleries for about 3.5 years and have been a curator for the last 10-ish years, both in Seattle, which is where I did my graduate work, and then in the Finger Lakes. I'm from the Southern Tier originally, so it's really exciting to be back in Western New York and be able to be a part of its kind of rich cultural heritage. So I'm going to talk to you about both Kimberly Chapman's exhibition, which is one of the 4 exhibitions that we have up at UB Art Galleries right now. But I'm going to start by talking a little bit first about UB Art Galleries in general. So we have 2 sites. One is Anderson Gallery, one is the Center for the Arts Gallery. So Center for the Arts is on North Campus. Anderson Gallery is near-ish South Campus. And Anderson Gallery is a particularly interesting space. It was decommissioned Buffalo Public School that was built, or that was purchased by David Anderson in the 1980s. David Anderson is the son of Martha Jackson, and Martha Jackson was a pioneering gallerist from Buffalo who was really active in the 1950s and 60s and a central figure in promoting contemporary artists from the time, both Americans, but also folks from a lot of other places as well. And after her death, David Anderson took over the gallery. He then transitions his commercial gallery to Buffalo, and UB is the recipient of his generosity, and that in 2000, he donated the bulk of our permanent collection and the building to us. So pictured here is Martha Jackson standing next to the French critic Michel Tapier. David Anderson seems to be sitting on the floor, I think, in this image. And then next to him is Norman Carton, who was one of her artists, and his painting is behind the grouping of them. I'm also going to show you just quickly 2 sort of views of the second floor gallery space at Anderson Gallery, which is accessible by freight elevator and stairs as well. And we often have, one show on the first floor, one show on the second floor. The first floor right now is water, grain, and steel art industry in the Erie Canal. Both of these exhibitions are up until February 28th, so you have a decent amount of time to see them. And then at the end of the talk, I'll put our gallery hours in the chat so you know when we're open. We are always free to the public. and see ourselves as, part of a public university and part of the public good. So that's really that kind of interest in the public good is what prompted my initial conversations with Kimberly Chapman, who is a porcelain artist who is based in Cleveland. And a lot of her work, really all of her work looks at what she describes as what women endure. So this relates to both women in asylums, as we'll be talking about today, but also women in like historical circuses, for example, women in reproductive health, and just sort of important historical figures that she kind of looks at and re-examines. So the title of the exhibition is a significant one. And I'm pulling up what Kim has sort of described as the poster children of this exhibition, which are the gold masked women. There are three of the earliest pieces that she did for the show. As I said, she's a porcelain sculptor, and for her, the beauty of the material is in interplay with the tension of the subject matter, which focuses on the histories of women and their lived experiences. And like I just mentioned, the title's significant because it's drawn from this document to the right, which is from the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Now, this document is infamous among folks that study asylums, and it should be taken with a grain of salt. We don't know exactly, which of these were really kind of medically supported or reasons that were actually written down in asylum records, but the gist of it is very, very truthful. So we see a wide range of things here, reasons why women were admitted in the asylum, including things like opium habit, periodical fits, women trouble, excitement as officer, exposure and quackery. All of these reasons range from things related to medical misogyny, right? So things like postpartum depression or endometriosis that we still don't really have enough medical information about because historically the medical establishment doesn't study disease that afflict or conditions that afflict women with the same rigorousness as those that afflict men. Fortunately, that's changing, but it's taken a really long time for that to happen. But there's also things in here that could be a reason for you to place your wife if she had become unwilling or if she had become inconvenient or if she was unable to bear you a child, for example. It was a convenient place to put single women or queer women or women that were deviant in some fashion. So asylums become a connection point for these women, as well as folks with, serious mental health conditions as well. Asylums were also going through major changes in the 19th century, which is where the Buffalo connection to this project develops. So I know you had Patrick Ryan on this very program a couple months ago. And if you want more in-depth information about the Richardson, I definitely encourage you to visit that PowerPoint, which is on the library's YouTube channel. But I'm going to give you a quick history of the Richardson, and then I'll close this talk by talking a bit about what we've been doing with them and with the Lipsey Architectural Center that's housed there now. So 19th century asylums were brutal, and the Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane was constructed to try and be a better place for the inhabitants than what had been the prevailing idea of mental health care beforehand. So the only mental health institution in New York at the time of the Richardson's construction was in Utica, which is a pretty far haul from Western New York even today. And so they'd been looking at making one on the western edge in a couple different cities. And Buffalo was chosen really because the city pledged 100 years of water usage and 203 acres for the site. So for those that have been to the Richardson, you know how large that landscape is even now. But it actually is about half of what it was originally because a lot of that acreage was sold to Buffalo State University. That land aspect is really important. I'm going to come back to it in a second. So the architect of the building was Henry Hobson Richardson, so hence the name that we now call the institution. And he was brought in 1870. At the time, he was only 32 years old. Residents started moving in 1880, and it was finally finished in 1895. Actually, after Richardson's death, he died kind of young, and so it was finished up by his firm. The landscape architect for the site was Frederick Law Olmsted, who, as Buffalonians, we've all heard of. He oversaw the landscaping and he suggested angling the building for maximum sunlight, which leads to the distinctive V shape that you can see in this plan here. So why does that design of the building matter? It's designed to the specifications of what was called the Kirkbride Plan, which was named for Thomas Story Kirkbride, who was a 19th century hospital superintendent, and his theories of wellness and treatment hinged on socialization and fresh air, what was referred to as moral treatment at the time instead of punitive or punishment-based. It's a linear plan, so there's a central administration building with a men's wing and a women's wing. In the Richardson building, as in most Kirkbride buildings, the hallways are wide so that people could be social. They could play games out there. They could sit and converse. And in contrast, their individual rooms are much smaller, but they were really supposed to be used only for sleeping, one person to a room. So Kirkbride's focus was on acute care. So for example, someone suffering from PTSD or the loss of a loved one. And he really promoted the idea of outdoor space and socialization as ways to combat some of those traumas. And so we know now that some of that isn't so far off base. Often, in the wake of grief or of a traumatic event, support groups are helpful for folks. Physical movement is helpful, getting outside. But these treatments are less effective for chronic mental illnesses. The building was never really designed for folks with chronic mental illnesses. But in 1890, the New York State adopted legislation making it the state's responsibility to take care of the mentally ill. This had originally been handled by almhouses and jails, not being handled well at all, to be clear, but this shifts. And so now institutions that had been designed more for acute care become kind of the catch-all for everybody. And so for a building designed for 600 people, starting in the 1940s, or really by the 1940s, it's at its most crowded. And instead of 600 people, there are 3,700 people. Those bedrooms that are 9 feet by 11 feet start to hold 2 or 3 people. People are sleeping in the hallways. There's massive overcrowding. This is not, typical of just the Richardson. It's actually really typical of mental health institutions in the mid-century and also today, unfortunately. So a lot of the things that Kirkbride kind of was championing get pushed to the side because of a lack of funding for mental health care, for example. So Kirkbride and his ideas were referred to at the time as the gold standard because it was seen as setting the gold standard for mental health, not rooted in punishment, but with an interest in rehabilitation. So I wanted to start, and we're moving now into the section that's like just about the exhibition. And I wanted to start with Kimberly's painting, The Gold Standard, because it speaks to that idea. And it's composed in part of paint chips that she acquired at the Richardson with permission. So it has this accretion of different layers of paint from the building itself. There's also a lot of texture in this painting. So there's aluminum foil that's been worked into it. There's sand, there's glue, there's human hair, and then there's porcelain pieces as well. So we're starting with this today. This also is kind of the first thing you see when you come up the stairs in the gallery. And the next thing you'll see is this piece, which I find really poignant and heartbreaking. We've talked a lot about the infrastructure of these places so far, and this piece references a particular site. which is the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, which was England's first institution dedicated to the care of the mentally ill. We know it now by its name, Bedlam, which was its nickname at the time, which has become a synonym for chaos and for mayhem. And as a method of raising funds, the public was allowed inside the building by paying a shilling. And so it becomes this huge tourist attraction with people coming in to gawk at the women, harass them, throw things at them, etc. Really grim practices. And so you have these fragile porcelain hands extending from the wall. They're wrapped in medical gauze and made from a mold of Kimberly's hand. The small coins that are to the right in this image, and they're placed in some of the hands as well. You can kind of see it in that image. Are shillings, so what you would pay to enter the building. And then there's also some larger coins that are souvenir keepsakes that you would take as a commemoration of visiting, which include a cameo of the institution's superintendent, a drawing of the hospital, and the year of entry. So in comparison to Bedlam, the sort of innovations of the Kirkbride plan feel particularly stark because it's much more, again, focused on patient rehabilitation. The next two works that I'm going to talk about quickly are works that speak to 19th century scientific ideas. I'm going to kind of say scientific in quotes, but in this case in particular, which is the idea of phrenology, which was a practice that claimed to determine a person's personality, intelligence, and character by analyzing the bumps and contours of their skull. So it's based on the belief that the brain's different functions were localized in specific areas, predicting aptitude or artistic talent or intelligence. Really what this does is reinforce a pseudoscientific idea that female brains were smaller and weaker than male brains. A lot of these early phrenological exams were performed in jails and in asylums to assess the likelihood of criminal intent. It's also a really eugenicist practice as well. So Kimberly's based this model on a phrenology study kit from the period. And so we wanted to, again, highlight that, particularly the use of study of patients in asylums as part of what was happening there. This piece is titled As Distinctive as You Are, and it's a series of toothbrushes. I think there's 86 toothbrushes to coordinate with the title, but don't quote me on that, that are all individual. They're, if you look at them closely, and we encourage you to do so, all of the different bite marks and usage of the toothbrushes is different. And that's referencing that we're unique, right? Like we all have distinctive mouth shapes, brushing patterns. There's also a really intense aspect of medical care in these institutions that included teeth pulling as a method of medical care, but really as a method of control. This is another section of the exhibition. I should also say I'm not showing you, I'm maybe showing you a third of what's in the show, so I encourage you to come see it in person, but these are some of my favorites and some of the ones I wanted to highlight. So this section of the show is, they're titled Carrier Cases, and these are 6 19th century, early 20th century suitcases that Kimberly's painted with a gray fabric paint, and they are in honor of 6 specific women who were institutionalized. Elizabeth Parsons Ward Packard, Clarissa Caldwell Lathrop, Anna Agnew. All 3 of those were institutionalized by the actions of their families. Frances Farmer, who was a Hollywood star, Mary Jane Ward, who was a novelist, and Adriana P. Brinkle, who was accused of being too fond of dress, whatever that means, right? These 6 suitcases honor these women, and each case includes 2 porcelain luggage tags and a decorative crest, which identify the patient, the asylum, the incarceration dates, and the offense. There's also, much like those coins that we just saw, a faded cameo portrait of the hospital superintendent. There's gold keys, so like really highlighting this idea of being locked away. There's a medallion of the hospital building, and you'll notice that there's hair coming out of the suitcases um, to really reference their entrapment. But also, you'll notice that some of the hair is white and gray, some of it's burgundy, some of it's black. Um, really speaking to the various ages of the women who were incarcerated, their various ethnicities. This could happen to anyone at the time. And Kimberly's inspiration for these suitcases came from, there was this discovery in the 1990s at the Willard Asylum, which is over in the Finger Lakes, of 400 patient suitcases that had been placed in the attic, probably in the early 20th century onwards, and then never recovered. So those were documented by a photographer and then are now held in the New York State Museum in Albany. So really powerful kind of history there as well. And then this is the last work I'm going to talk about today. This is titled Encasing the Past, Invisible Reliquaries. It's the most recent work in the exhibition. It's still kind of ongoing. And reliquaries are considered hallmarks of devotion, particularly in Catholicism. And they're often an ornate container that protects and displays a relic so that it can be venerated. A relic in this case is often the earthly remains of saints and martyrs. So objects such as teeth, fingers, bones, and hair. There's often kind of a hierarchy of relics as well. So like physical body parts are higher in that hierarchy. Reliquary cases are often really beautiful and ornate, and they can become a stand-in for the relic itself. So we kind of lose sight of the relic in those settings. So instead, these are transparent towers of objects. It's an assortment of secular relics that honor the lives of institutionalized women. So these objects are placed in resin without adornment. So there's no real distraction for the viewer. We're like focused in on the objects themselves, ideally. The metal structures around these resin towers are a protective armature and call to mind Gothic arches or a triptych altarpiece. So there is that kind of religious connotation to it as well. And these embedded objects include found objects from the Richardson itself, including paint chips, sandstone and brick rubble, wired glass, electrical circuits, bolts, there's a roller skating wheel, there's a water spigot. So we have like literal buffalo kind of remnants and relics being memorialized here. There's also, you can see some objects that look maybe more like bone. Those are porcelain objects created by Chapman, representing bones, fingers, coins, shoes, birds, and skulls. And they're joined with items like ink quills, leather restraints, razor blades, and masks. Not site-specific, but things that would have been imagined to be part of the daily asylum life. And I'm going to close with this slide. So I hope that gave you a good kind of sense of the exhibition. I'm happy to answer any questions you have in the period after this, but I also wanted to bring up this event that we held at UB in November, which was the what we called the Buffalo Remembrance Project. And this was in dialogue with the Richardson Olmsted campus. And we kind of crowdsourced and asked people if they had an object or an item that was owned by a female family member who had been at the Richardson at any point in its history. And we actually had, I think in total 18 people came, which was incredible. And they came and talked to us about their relatives, and then UB photo students photographed those objects. And the photographs of those objects will be on display in the Lipsey Architectural Center starting on January 29th. We're having a reception that evening from 6 to 8. I encourage you all to come. This event was really meaningful. We heard a lot of very difficult stories, but sharing those stories is therapeutic. And we want these objects to bring personhood and dignity back to these folks' relatives. One of the things that came up a lot, and that was our goal with the project, was to destigmatize mental health care, to sort of refocus on individual people and their personalities. people that we love, people that we care about, people who the system maybe at its moment is not built for. One of the things that someone said at this event stuck with me, which was that mental health should be treated like heart disease. So meaning that you see a specialist, like it's any other condition. And so our hope with this exhibition and with this event is that, again, individual histories can be brought forward, and these folks can, we can learn from them and we can learn about why they mattered. All right,
Well,
thank you.
uh, what a tour. What a tour. Thank you very much for putting that together. And what I especially appreciated was uh, every one of our cultural organizations in Western New York have a founding. And we forget how it gets started, what the mission maybe was then and how it is today. What got me with those 86 items was, and I was trying to think of the notion of hospitals. Uh, the, Not like today. I doubt if there were many hospitals around for anything. I mean, there was the doctor down the road a bit, but a place to stay. And that's what, because I saw gunshot wounds as one of the things. And you say, all right, normally you don't go to an asylum for a gunshot room, you go to a hospital. But
Right.
just comment on that. Were there many, for instance, in Buffalo, or was this suddenly the grand hotel, if you will, of hospitals to come and pay a visit if you needed to do so? Hence, 86 different reasons might have existed in that general sense. What do you think?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Like there were hospitals in Buffalo at the time, but they were really overcrowded. In some instances, there was a poor hospital actually where UB's South Campus is now. There's a couple buildings on South Campus that are original hospital buildings. And when the Richardson opened, if you could move your family member there, that's what you did because it was, I mean, if folks have been in there, you know this, it is grand. It is the level of detail is really astounding. You have beautifully carved fireplaces, you have a lot of windows, you just have what feels more intentional and more spacious, particularly compared to what was there before. And I think, I mean, even into the 1970s when the Richardson closed, a lot of things that maybe now you wouldn't seek institutionalization for. Um, there were no other places for you to go. So I should also say too, towards the end, a lot of the inhabitants had dementia. And so it was a place for folks with dementia. Now we have, much more kind of specialized memory care centers. But at the time, the options were really, really limited for folks.
Really helps us understand our current situations when you look back
Yeah.
and reference where you've come from, which is the whole
Yeah.
point of history in many ways. And
Yeah.
part of
And there was something Patrick and I had talked about this. There's some quote. So at a certain point, the state in the like 1890s starts to reduce its funding for building the Richardson. And some lawmaker said something like, "Why are we building palaces for the insane?" And that's a paraphrase, but like that quote really stuck with me because I think, I mean, again, that mindset is unfortunately still too common. And that's when you start to see things become like more overcrowded and more undersupported. And yeah, I think having that history being told through artwork that's both really beautiful because porcelain is beautiful. It's also the hardest clay to work with. It's really, really delicate. So you overfire it a tiny bit and it's going to break into a million pieces. So that level of difficulty, I think, makes it a really interesting media to talk about difficult subjects like these.
it was built in that City Beautiful movement that Buffalo really
Totally.
played a major part in and helps explain a value system. You build a building, you make it beautiful. And luckily, we didn't tear down most of our buildings, and now we're a national treasure, which includes the Richardson complex. So, what questions might we have from our
Yeah,
audience?
so we are at 1 o'clock, but I have a couple of questions from the chat. One about uh, when someone was admitted to the asylum, did they pretty much spend the rest of their life there? Or are there stories of women being discharged or, returning to their life or starting new lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my sample size for this is relatively small, but having just talked to a lot of folks who were at our Remembrance Day in November, most folks actually were not there their entire lives. In some instances, and if you had a chronic condition such as schizophrenia or dementia, you may have been, or at least been there for an extended period. But often folks would be in for a set amount of time and then they would be released. It was also a wide range of some women self-admitted, some were admitted by their families, some were admitted by law enforcement. There's a whole range there as well.
Interesting. And were the folks that came to the Remembrance Project, the documentation day, was there sort of a range of experiences in
Yeah.
that? That's interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And it varied a lot, I think, between the folks who had relatives with sort of the most intense experiences were in the period when the building was the most overcrowded, so in the 40s through 60s. For folks that were there earlier in the century, much more of a wide range of treatments. But yeah, totally all over the place in terms of conditions, in terms of length of stay, all of that.
Awesome. The other question that was in the chat was about the exhibition, and if there are any positive patient outcomes depicted in the exhibition. And I wondered also about in the interviews that you did with folks that came in for the documentation day, if there were any positive experiences as well.
Yeah, so the exhibition itself really focuses more on the sort of involuntary nature of confinement for folks that maybe did not have an acute condition, but who had some other health condition that, again, their husband wanted them, to be institutionalized for.
Right.
The positive outcome I see from the exhibition really is the sharing those stories. Kimberly has done a lot of research, and so a lot of basically every piece is referencing a particular person or a particular series of people. We've tried to highlight that as much as we can. For the visitors that came to the Remembrance Day, there were a few. I can't say half necessarily, but there were definitely a few who said like this was the best place for my relative. This treatment really worked. We needed somewhere safe for her to go, like that kind of thing. So I also want to highlight that too, that this is Kirkbride himself had really good intentions with a lot of the design of the building, the structure of the care. For some folks that worked for sure. And for some folks it didn't. And that range is inherent for sure.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, as we're wrapping up, I wondered if you could just remind everyone how long the show is up at the UB Anderson
Yes.
Gallery, and then also the date of the opening at the Lipsey Center as well for the
Yes.
photographs.
Absolutely. So the show is up at UB Anderson Gallery until February 28th. So you got a couple months. It's going to be a long winter. You need things to do. Come visit us. And the exhibition at the Lipsey opens on January 29th from 6 to 8 p.m. And it will be up there for a while from
Yeah.
then. We do have slightly different holiday hours. So we're usually open Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to 5. As I said, always free and open to the public. We're closed December 24th through 26th, and then again January 31st through 1st. So fairly typical days to be closed. If you're interested in coming to the Center for the Arts Gallery, we do close for January because there just aren't students around. We are very open to folks making an appointment and stopping in, though. So just, reach out to me or to another staff member, and we can do that for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Great presentation. I'm so glad you could put it together. It's and especially the public connection with UB and seeing yourself as a service and hence the free. So folks ought to take advantage of that mission statement basically on your part. So folks, thank you for joining us today, and hope you'll join us again right after the new year. Imagine Buffalo will return on Tuesday, January 6th on Zoom where we'll be joined by Tanya Staples and Aaron Lowinger. Now, both of them are from the Say Yes Buffalo Public Schools, Community Schools program, with Tanya, the overseer of that. And it's 22 schools that are open on Saturdays for the community they serve, the students, parents, activities, food. It's an interesting program, and I want to make sure folks in Buffalo are aware of it. It's something fairly unique. Well, it's holiday season, so my best wishes to everyone for the holidays that they'll be observing, Hanukkah, certainly Merry Christmas, and the turn of another year. So a Happy New Year as well. I'm Dennis Galucki. Be well and good day.